Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you all again for joining for this webinar, which is focused on questionnaires in business research. Now, what are the contents for today? What is operational definition? And then we'll focus on how to search the questionnaire, the structure of a research questionnaire, what are the considerations that one should take into consideration when designing a questionnaire for a study? What are the common mistakes that we do when we are designing a questionnaire? And then finally, the most important thing, what would you do if you can't find a questionnaire? So the session today is focused on questionnaires in business research. Now, whenever we are conducting a research or a quantitative research, one of the most important thing is collection of data. Even if it's qualitative research and it's primary, the most important thing is collection of data. And primarily what we do is we resort to questionnaire for collection of our data. If your questionnaire is wrong, your analysis is obviously tends to be wrong or incorrect. And once the analysis is not right, the results are wrong, and so forth, your conclusion in your discussions. Papers are rejected because of wrong use of or incorrect use of questionnaires as well. So you need to provide to give adequate attention when you are selecting your questionnaire. But before you go on to select your questionnaire or the source or the measures through which you are going to collect the data, you have to define the constructs in your study, the variables that make up your framework. They should be properly operationalized. So you need to properly define your constructs or variables in the study. Now, where are these definitions? These definitions are already available in research articles. So the question arises, what is an appropriate definition for my study? Now, as I've already mentioned in my previous webinars, plus on the videos on YouTube, that you have to read a lot. Before you make up your framework, you make sure that you read at least 30 to 40 papers. So you know that what variables you are looking into, what is meant by those variables, and how different researchers in existing research have used those questionnaires. And while reading those research papers, you will come across different definitions. Now, definition or the operational definition will change with the change of subjects, and it will change with the change of context. I cannot use the same definition of social responsibility when I am studying a profit-based organization. And when I am studying a university or a non-profit organization, I cannot use the same definition for both one of them. The reason being that profit-making organization, their ultimate objective is to improve their profits. While this is not the objective of an educational establishment, or this is not an objective of an NGO or a social service. So whenever you are selecting a definition for a particular variable in your study, you have to consider these things. So before you go on searching the questionnaires, you will have to find out what definitions are available and which definition actually fits your study, keeping in line the objectives of your study. As in management, you will come across hundreds of definitions for a particular concept. For instance, there is a paper on CSR and its definitions. And that particular paper has over 37 definitions on CSR. Now, which one will I use for my study, depending on the objectives of my research? Similarly, internal marketing, another concept that is used in organizations. So there are actually over 50 definitions for the concept. Same is the case for knowledge management or leadership. In the last webinar, we actually looked into a paper by Nathan Eva on servant leadership that identified over 10 to 15 definitions for servant leadership. and then they propose their own definitions because all the other definitions lacked something. So it's very important that you take time out and focus on the operational definition. How do you operationalize the variable in your study? Before before selecting your questionnaire, always make sure that you've got the right operational definition that fits your study. This is the very first step, that you operationally define your constructs in your study. It simply means how do you plan to operationalize or actually use the construct in your study. And it will obviously entail a definition has characteristics of the concept. So what characteristics are you looking into? I'm doing a study on social responsibility. So social responsibility has got multiple dimensions. The most basic the dimension is economic dimension, that is followed by legal, then ethical, then philanthropic. In my study, I'm not focusing on the economic dimension. So if my definition has got economic dimension in it, obviously then my operationalization would be wrong. And the reviewer will catch this thing, and he will or she will notify you that in your definition there is an economic dimension, but when you are measuring social responsibility, there are no questions related to economic dimension or economic performance of the organization. So how do you define the constructs in your study? This is particularly important. Obviously, this is what we call operationalization. Now, your measurement is guided by your operational definition, as I gave an example of corporate social responsibility. Now, here are a few examples of how you operationalize or how you operationally define different constructs in your study and where they are defined. You can define them in your introduction, but mostly we do not put definitions in the introduction. It is only that when the concept is so novel, it might lack clarity, that before the reader gets to know the concept, he or she can't read the whole paper. In that particular case, it's always advisable that you define your concepts in the introduction. Otherwise, in most of the cases, the concepts are operationalized in literature review or in the methodology, as is the case in these two examples. Now, operationalization is the process of strictly defining variables into measurable factors. The process defines vague concepts and allows them to be measured empirically and quantitatively. Now, if you look at this example, the first is organizational commitment. So what they have done is they have operationalized it as, now organizational commitment has been defined as a multi-dimensional construct. So once you look into the definitions, once you search for the definitions, you will find out whether this particular construct is unidimensional or multi-dimensional and how it has been previously used. Now, have the organizations have the researchers used it as a multidimensional construct or a unidimensional construct? So operationalization is the process of strictly defining variables into measurable factors. So what you do through operationalization is you explain or you define how you are going to measure a particular variable. The process defines vague concepts. Now, the concepts that you are using will have multiple definitions. In order to give your reader clarity about the concepts, you need to define the concepts. So the reader would know this is how the definition is or how the concept is operationalized, and this is how it's going to be used in research. Now, here are a few examples. Organizational commitment. Organizational commitment has been defined as a multi-dimensional construct related to workplace performance and effective organizational commitment. For this study, organizational commitment was operationalized as an employee's emotional desire, that is, affective commitment. There are two other dimensions of organizational commitment as well, that is, normative commitment and continuance commitment. Now, if you do not define organizational commitment in your study, the reader or the reviewer will think that you are taking organizational commitment as a whole, as a multi-dimensional construct with all three dimensions. But if you clearly define it, the reader would know that you are taking only one single dimension of the construct. Now, how are you measuring the construct? So they have taken the all famous 7-point Likert type scale for organizational commitment by Allen and Mayer 1990. Now, where is this definition located in this paper? This definition was presented in the methodology section. You can present your definition in literature review or in the introduction as well. Now, when do you present your definition in the introduction? If the concept is so novel and lacks clarity, and it's very new and it is vague, it's a very good idea to put it in the introduction, so that before the reader goes on to read the whole paper, he or she knows what the concept actually means. But sometimes the concept is very simple to understand, just like organizational commitment or maybe leadership. So you do not need to define it in the introduction. What you can do is you can put it into your literature review or research methodology. In this case, what they have done is they have first defined or operationalized the concept and then identified the scale that they are using to measure this particular construct. Similarly, in the other example, consumer perceptions in the firm's CSR image was operationalized as the extent to which consumers perceived that a firm supports socially beneficial activities. Now, there are multiple dimensions of CSR. As I mentioned, there is voluntariness, there is economic performance, there is legal dimension to it, there is ethical dimension to it, there is philanthropic dimension to it. But in this study, they are only focusing on socially beneficial activity, that is social or social dimension of CSR. And how have they operationalized this? Through 6 items based on 2 scales by Magnan and Perez and Rodriguez del Bosque. So this is how they have operationalized this construct. So this is how you should present your operational definition as well before going on to use this scale, so that the reader, the reviewers know that this is how you have operationalized and this is how you plan to use the scale, and this is the scale that you are going to use. Now, once you are through the operational definition and you know this is how I'm going to define, the next step or the important step is to search for questionnaire. Now, rest assured, there are in most of the cases, you will find maybe tens of questionnaires or scales, as they are called, or measures. They can be called measures, they can be called scales. Now, why are they called measure or scale? Because they are used to measure a particular construct. Now, where do you find these constructs? If we can go back to our discussion or our webinar on Mendeley and Google Scholar, therein we discussed how to search using those particular softwares and website. You can use research papers that are already published in your area. So if you've started research, for instance, on a particular variable, and you have finalized or almost finalized your framework, you start searching for research papers, more research papers on those variables. Once you search those variables, you put them in Mendeley, or maybe you keep them in a folder if you don't want to use Mendeley. Now, once you have got them in Mendeley or the folder, what you do is you search through those particular papers on a particular variable and see what scales have been utilized for a particular construct. Now, it's very important, and we'll be looking into that detail as well, which questionnaire to utilize. How do we select our questionnaire? So that comes next. Let's first search our questionnaire. So let's say we've got Mendeley here. It's opening, just hold on. Okay, So if anyone who's new, there is a video on how to use Mendeley on the YouTube channel. Link will be shared, and then you can obviously go on and look in there. Okay, let's say we've got this servant leadership document. Now I want to search for what scales have been used to measure servant leadership. Now a simple process could be just write scale. If you've got all the papers on servant leadership, maybe 100 or 200 papers, the simplest approach could be just put them in Mendeley and write scale. And let's see if anybody has used the word scale. But if you've got multiple papers on a particular construct, it's highly likely that you will have scale-based papers in that folder as well. By scale-based papers, I mean those papers that have primarily focused on development of scale for a particular construct. So once you download multiple papers for each and every variable in your framework, you put them into Mendeley, you search with the word scale, and therein you will know, okay, which variables or which papers are available that have focused on scale. Let's see. This is one, a new scale to measure executive servant leadership. But I'm not focusing on executives, I'm focusing on employees. So this might not be a suitable scale. Now there is this Spanish validation of servant leadership short scale. There is this servant leadership behavior scale. And there is this SLBS6 validation of short form of servant leadership behavior scale. Let's see this one. And if you go down through the paper, since we are interested in scale, okay, this is scale development. This is what they have done. This is how they have developed this scale. What they have done is they have changed this large scale into this short scale. Now, when shall we use a large scale? When shall we use a short scale? We'll talk about that as well. Yes, a variable construct, I'm using it interchangeably. Okay, so this is their method. This is their Likert scale that they have used. This is very important to keep note of what Likert scale did they use. Okay, and here are the 6 questions that they have used for measuring servant leadership. And this is their loading. So what you can do is simply use this scale, copy it into your questionnaire and use it. Obviously, it's always recommended that you read these statements, change them, adapt the questionnaire to your own setting. This is one scale on servant leadership. Now a question might arise that in your folder you might have papers related to servant leadership, life satisfaction, career commitment, or other variables. So if you type scale, you'll get all the scales. What you can do is you can always type servant leadership and scale. So what you'll get is you'll only get papers that have servant leadership and scale. So because I am searching for servant leadership scales, I'm not interested in other scales for now. So if you've got folders with papers on different constructs, this is something that you can do, and this is what we have already done in our webinar on searching in Mendeley. So this is one thing that you can do. Let's say, let me search something else. Let me search, say I'm interested in commitment. If there is something on commitment. Yes, there is something on commitment as well. So this variable has been used in relationship to servant leadership. Now, just give me a second. Let's open this paper. Servant Leadership, Trust and Organizational Commitment of Public Sector Employees in China by Miao, Newman, Schwartz and Zhu. Now if we go down, where can we find a scale? Okay, let's see where can we find the scale. It must be in research methodology. Let's go to research methodology. Here, methods, sample and procedures. So for now we are not interested in other bits. We are more, this is measures section. So what they have done, how have they measured servant leadership? This is their measure of servant leadership. This is their measure of trust. And this is what we are interested in, organizational commitment. Now this is how they have measured organizational commitment. Now what should I do? Shall I copy the skill directly from this paper if it's available in a table somewhere? Or shall I go directly to the source? It is strongly recommended to go to the source. Do not just copy and paste from the paper, because they have adapted the questionnaire based on their own needs. And most of the times you are not reading the whole paper. So it's always strongly recommended to go back to the original source. So you know what were the items in the original source, how they were worded, what was the wording of those items in those that particular questionnaire, was it validated or not. So things like that, many other things like that. So now I found organizational commitment scale. Similarly, you can search other skills as well once you've got the papers in this particular software. Another important thing that you can do is, or another mean to search for questionnaire is, okay, now the second thing is scale handbooks. Another is this, taking measure to work. Now this is a guide. There what Dale and Fields has done is, he has put in different skills that we normally use in organizational research, and then he has also identified the reliability and validity of the scales, and a lot of different things that are identified. For example, they've got job satisfaction scales, whole lot of them. It has got organizational commitment scale, whole lot of organizational commitment scales. See what fits your study. Developmental experience, supervisory support, perception of organizational politics scale. There are so many of the scales. This book will also be shared with you, and another book on scales as well. So if you want to find out scales, you can go for handbooks as well. There are very few available. We'll share what we have got with us. So there are whole lots of scale, maybe say over 150 scales. So you can use these scales in your own research, and they are very like validated, reliable scales. Now this is how you search your research questionnaire from existing research papers and scale handbooks as well. Now moving on. And you can use Google Scholar. There is a video on YouTube, my channel, or our channel rather, on how to use Google Scholar for searching the questionnaire. For searching, and then obviously you can use different words. You can use the word measure, you can use the word scale, you can use the word questionnaire, and other things. Yes, every book will be shared definitely in the group. Don't worry. Now moving on. Now structure of a research questionnaire. This is particularly important. This is very important. A research questionnaire is a critical source of data to be collected from participants in this study. So a weaker structure would obviously deter or discourage your respondents to fill in the questionnaire. And once they are discouraged to fill in the questionnaire, you won't have reliable data, which means your results will be flawed, and obviously you can't do proper justification or give proper justification for your results. So you have to structure it properly. We'll be looking at few examples of a bad questionnaire, a slightly problematic one, and a good one. The questionnaire represents one part of your survey process. It is, however, a very vital part of the process. A poorly written questionnaire with grammatical mistakes, uh, lots of jargon, with the items that are not worded correctly, items that are verbose, too much wordiness in it, obviously the respondents, and collecting data through questionnaires is a difficult task. So what you need to do is you need to properly format, design, and structure your questionnaire so that the respondents are at ease while they are filling in the questionnaire. Otherwise, there will be incorrect data or maybe bias in the data as well. So what are the considerations? What things one should consider while designing, formatting, or structuring a questionnaire? Code the questions. It's very important that you give coding to your questionnaire. Obviously, you can what you can do is do not present the coding to the respondent, but keep it with yourself. How do you code the question? This is particularly important while entering the data as well. For instance, I've got 5 items for a particular construct. Let's say, let me open that example again. Now here are 6 questions, 6 items to measure servant leadership. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Now how do I code it? So what I do is I write SL1 with this, SL2 with this, SL3 with this, SL4 with this one, SL5 with the next one, and SL6 with the last one. So this is the process of coding. In other case, I might have another questionnaire. Let's say this is a questionnaire. Now this is a construct. In a study that we normally do, the normal business research studies, we have got variables or construct. And what we call these variables or construct, we call them latent variables or latent constructs because they are unobserved. They are not measured directly. In order to measure them, what we do is we formulate questions or statements. Now these are these statements. What you need to do is you need to code each of these statements like this. This is my first construct, ISR, and this is the first item in the construct, so I've named it or coded it as ISR1. The next is ISR2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and same is the case for the rest of them. We'll be discussing this questionnaire slightly later when we are discussing examples. So once you have coded it, or obviously you should code it, these are not in order, so you can obviously rephrase the first questions first and then code them. It's up to you. Now rephrased to meet the requirements. If I am conducting a study in Pakistan and I'm using a questionnaire that has been developed by someone in Australia or England whose first language is English, I might not use the word zeal in my study because zeal is a word that is not very common to people who might be filling in my questionnaire. So I might be using an alternative to the word zeal. So whenever you are using a questionnaire that is developed elsewhere or somewhere else, somewhere in a country where the first language is English, see if your respondents would understand the language. Do not just copy and paste the questionnaire and present it because your respondents might not be able to understand the items. So rephrase to meet your requirements. There should be at least 4 to 5 items in the construct. This is again very important. Why am I saying that there should be 4 to 5 items in a construct? Because if we go back again to our Smart PLS webinar, what we did there was there are times when you are using SCM based software like Smart PLS, Amos, Lizrel, M+, or any other software. A few items might not load well onto the construct. A few items might not represent the underlying construct very well. So what you should do is you should have to remove those items. If you've got only 2 or 3 items in the construct, if your construct is defined by just 2 or 3 items, and if you delete 2 of them, then your construct is no longer, you can say, reliable, or it loses its face validity. So you should have at least 4 to 5 or 6 items in a construct, so that even if they are deleted, you still have 3 or 4 items in the construct. Now it's recommended that you have at least 3 items in a construct. and do not delete more than 20% of your items during SCM. Well, there is 10%, but 20% more or less is allowed. Okay. Would you use a single dimensional scale or multi-dimensional scale? What is meant by single dimensional or multi-dimensional? Let's have a look. If you go back to our scale here, this is now a single dimensional scale of servant leadership, just 6 items. But there are other scales as well that are multi-dimensional. For instance, let's go back to our own paper. Now this is a scale on servant leadership in Spanish higher education, and it is multi-dimensional. Why is it multi-dimensional? This is why it's multi-dimensional. Because servant leadership is measured by 6 or rather 7 other latent constructs behaving ethically. And then behaving ethically is measured using these 7 items. So servant leadership is actually made up of these dimensions: behaving ethically, development, emotional healing, empowerment, pioneering, relationship building, and wisdom. So this is a multi-dimensional construct. But if we look at this paper, servant leadership is directly measured using 6 items. So this is a single dimensional scale, not a multi-dimensional scale. Now, when do you use a single dimensional scale or a multi-dimensional scale? The answer is purely subjective, and it depends on the nature of your study. Now, for instance, let's say I had this paper. Okay, this is what I do. Your supervisor or you by yourself might differ with my technique. This is what I do. I normally, what I do is, for independent variable or dependent variable, most of the times I've got dimensions. Most of the times. But for mediators and moderators, I'm mostly going for single dimensional scales. Now this is my way of doing it. You might differ, or your supervisors might differ as well. So you have to take into consideration how your supervisor works. So what I've done is I've taken corporate social responsibility as a multidimensional scale. Now, if you have read another paper of mine, you might question my approach, and you would say, well, this, you did not use this approach in your other paper. So let's see that other paper as well, and let's see the reason behind this, so that you understand why we do, me and Umar, because me and Umar work together, so most of the times our approaches are similar to each other. Okay, where is it? Now this is another paper in which what I've done is, or what rather we have done it, now this is the model, and for each of the construct there is a single dimensional scale, even for CSR, for service quality, for customer satisfaction, image, reputation, loyalty. Now you could question this approach now, that on one hand I'm saying that I'm using multi-dimensional scales, and on the other hand I'm using single dimensional scale even for my independent variable. Reason in this case was that this model is pretty complex with loads of variables in it. And if I would have used a multi-dimensional scale for corporate social responsibility, this would have obviously taken my questionnaire to be too long. It would have made the questionnaire over maybe 3 or 4 pages. And then I would not have got the respondents that I needed, or the number of respondents that I needed. So this is basically to some extent subjective. If you think that your questionnaire is not long enough and you've got very few variables, maybe 1 independent, 1 dependent, and 2 mediators, you can go for multi-dimensional scales for independent or maybe dependent. But still, I would recommend that you go for single dimensional scales for mediators and moderators. Okay, now there are a few questions. What are the considerations using single? Okay, I'm working on, I'm just like explaining what are the consideration, and I'll take the questions in the end. Please, all questions in that in thorough details. Okay, so moving on. Sorry, I keep opening this page. Okay, now, so you use single dimensional scale or multi-dimensional scale based on the needs of your study. If you've got too many variables in your study, try to go for single dimensional scale. But that single dimensional scale, whatever you are using, should complement your operational definition as well. You can mix 2 scale to create your own single dimensional scale as well, and we'll be talking about that as well. So when you've got too many variables, try to go for single dimensional scale. Or when you are discussing a very novel concept and you do not have much scales available, then you are left with no choice but to use what is available. But if you've got too many scales available for a particular construct that are single dimensional or multidimensional, you can go for single or multidimensional. Now, using multidimensional scale have got their own advantages as well, because obviously it gives you a more detailed study, because you are focusing on different dimensions of the concept. So it makes your study more thorough, more detailed. Design the questionnaire with analysis in mind. Again, this is particularly important. Do not just put in the questions. Think of the analysis that you are going to do. This is particularly important when you are using the Likert scale. So what Likert scale are you using? If you're using a dichotomous scale, yes or no, obviously you can't use SCM based studies or regression analysis. You might have to go for differences or chi-square. Define the terminologies that may be difficult to understand. Okay, obviously sometimes you are conducting a study where you are asking respondents about their responses or about their opinion, and there are terminologies in your questionnaire that are particularly difficult to understand. Now, it's very good idea to define those terminologies right at the top of your questionnaire. For example, if I'm conducting a study on sustainability and my questionnaire uses the word emissions, so a common person might not know about CO2 emissions. So it's always a good idea to define emissions right at the top of the questionnaire before the respondent starts to fill in the questionnaire. Length of the questionnaire, again, very important. Now, what I recommend is, in most of the cases, do not go over 2 pages, like front and back. And I've got a format here which I will share again. In that particular format, what I've done is I've so squeezed in the information that if you've got 60 or 66 questions, you won't go over 2 pages. So if your respondent sees more than 2 pages or more than 1 page, there is a sort of, or there is a tendency not to fill the questionnaire. Make their life easier so that they can make your life pretty much easy. So length of the questionnaire is particularly important. Focus on the wording of the questionnaire. Obviously, we have already talked about it in the rephrase point, that you need to make the life of your respondent easy. Help them understand the questionnaire. Make it so easy to understand that they feel like filling in the questionnaire. Keep your answer choices balanced. Again, this is very important. The type of Likert scale that you use, the choices that you are giving your respondent. Are you using a 3-point Likert scale, 5-point Likert scale, or 7-point Likert scale? Now, it is obviously not recommended to use a 3-point Likert scale, because this does not give your respondent much choice, much options to give their answer. So like this, very helpful, helpful, neither helpful nor unhelpful. This is very limited. A very good choice would be, a balanced approach would be very helpful, helpful, neither helpful nor unhelpful, unhelpful, very unhelpful. Or you can't just like do agree, neutral, disagree. The best option or the good option would be strongly disagree, disagree, neutral, agree, strongly agree. Or you can go for 7-point Likert scale. Strongly agree, agree, slightly agree, neutral, slightly disagree, disagree, strongly disagree. Obviously, you can use both 5 or 7, but in most of the cases what I have read is they recommend 7-point Likert scale, but mostly 5-point Likert scale is used. So you can use either 5 or 7, the results will be fine, keeping in mind the other considerations as well. So review your questionnaire. Once you have done those things and put in the questionnaire, you have got the questionnaire right in front of you, review your questionnaire. Do not be haste, or do not like, there's a tendency in us that we want to just get rid of things. And this tendency leads to wrong questionnaires, wrong results, wrong research, and in the end we are questioning, why was this research not published? Or why was this research rejected? Because we are not giving time, we are taking hasty decisions. So review your questionnaire. Does the questionnaire have items that complement the operational definition? Now go back to your operational definitions. What was your operational definition? And does this particular questionnaire focus on that particular operational definition or how you operationalized your construct? In your operationalization, you talked about that no matter what, I have to work for this company. In your operationalization, you have mentioned no matter what, I have to work for this company. But in your definition, you have mentioned an emotional attachment to the organization as definition of commitment. Now, these are two contradictory things. You cannot have this particular item in your questionnaire when you are defining commitment as an emotional bond between you and your organization. So there is a contradiction between the operational definition and the item that you have selected to measure a particular construct. Has the questionnaire followed the necessary questionnaire development guidelines? Now, the questionnaire that you are using, this could be a consideration as well, but now I put it in here. So now, did the questionnaire that you use, did they follow the necessary questionnaire development guidelines, or just they pasted some literature and then just did the analysis? Was this questionnaire validated? Did the questionnaire had face validity? Is it from a quality journal? Now, again, this is again a very important point. This we'll be elaborating on this again as well in the common mistakes section. So is it from a quality journal or some journal may be published somewhere? So always go for those quality journals that we have already identified, that are like journals published by Elsevier, Sage, Springer, Taylor and Francis, Wiley, Science Direct, and others. The questionnaire that you are using, was its reliability and validity established? Was the questionnaire tested for its reliability, consistency, and validity, accuracy? Is it easy to understand for my respondents? Now, when you are reviewing, do not review it yourself. Give it to your friends, colleagues. If you do not want to do a pilot study because the questionnaire has already been developed and you're just writing a paper, give it to your friends. Maybe a few of your students as well if you are teaching somewhere. Your supervisor, anyone who can read the questionnaire and give you valuable suggestions. Now, what are the common mistakes that we normally make when we are designing our questionnaire or considering our questionnaire? Failure to relate your questionnaire with the study objectives. Now, my study objective was to assess social responsibility in higher education. But what I looked into was the economic performance of universities, but universities are not economic entities. So my questions are wrong because they do not lead to or do not relate to the study objectives. I'm interested in studying leadership and its focus on or how innovative leadership influence innovation within the organization. But then I was asking about emotional attachment of the leader. Most of the questions were related to emotional attachment or maybe servant leadership. So innovation or innovative leadership is different than servant leadership. Or my focus was on transformational leadership, but then I asked question about charismatic leadership because I couldn't find a questionnaire on transformational leadership. Lack of proper operationalization. Again, we have discussed this in greater detail. There has to be proper operationalization of the construct. And you can only properly operationalize the constructs if you have properly defined the constructs. If you fail to define the constructs properly, obviously the operationalization would not be proper. Now, keep searching for definition. Even if you can't find one, you cannot say there is none. This is wrong. There will be definitions, but again, there is a very valid question that might be asked. There are no definitions. I have searched Google Scholar, I have searched all the databases, I've searched the Google Talk to Books, and I've searched everything, but I couldn't find the definition. Now, for those who are still thinking that it's very difficult to find operationalization, see my video on Google Talk to Books on the YouTube channel, and you'll see how to use Google Talk to Books to identify definitions or get definitions from the books. Now, if you've got grammatical mistakes, check your questionnaire for grammatical mistakes as well. Because if your questionnaire has got grammatical mistakes, it makes the life of your respondent difficult, and then they will lose interest in your questionnaire. Assuming the respondents have prior knowledge about the terminologies, this is again a very serious and fatal mistake that you can make. Do not assume anything. Your respondents do not know anything. Define the concepts if you think that they will not, or if there is even 1% chance that they will not know the definition. Put the definitions right at the top. Selecting scale before operationalization. Now, this is something that we normally do. We look for the scale. Once we find the scale, then we are looking for operationalization. This is wrong. First, define your concepts, then look for scales. Otherwise, you'll be in trouble. You'll be then searching for operationalizations and you won't be finding it. A good idea always is when whatever paper that you, okay, now this is a tip or trick. Whatever paper you are using for your scale or whatever scale you are using, it must be published in some paper. So they would have definitely defined that particular concept in their literature. Go find that definition and use it. So you'll find the definition or operationalization and the measure in the same paper. Questions asked inaccurately by the interviewer. If you're doing qualitative research, you have to have what do you call it? A set of questions that you ask. Be prepared. Do not ask questions when you are conducting the interview, or do not think of questions when you are conducting the interview. Have some preliminary questions ready and then go to the interviewer and ask them the questions. So you have to be prepared so that you do not ask inaccurate questions. Failure of the respondent to understand the questions. Obviously, the respondent would fail to understand the questions if those questions have got terminologies that you did not define. If your questionnaire has got grammatical mistakes. Asking respondents to describe attitudes on subjects for which they hold no conscious attitude or information. Now you are asking the respondent about something for which they do not have any information. For instance, you are asking a teacher about the service quality within an organization. Well, they might know about the service quality, but who is the better person to define the service quality? It's like asking a hotel owner about the services or the quality of services in their hotel. So you have to ask the right kind of people the right kind of questions. Failure of the interviewer to record the reply accurately or completely. So what's the solution for this particular problem? If you are going for qualitative research and doing qualitative interviews, record those interviews with the permission of the interviewee. Do not take hand notes, because sometimes or most of the times you will lose on to critical information. Obviously, if you do not have any other choice, you will have to take hand notes. Failure of the questionnaire to record the reply accurately or completely. Lack of clarity in the questionnaire. What if you have got lack of clarity in the questionnaire? Obviously, if there is lack of clarity, obviously that comes due to lack of clear understanding of the statements. Maybe the jargon is used, maybe the questionnaire has got difficult words. So add clarity to your questionnaire. You are using a wrong Likert scale. We have already discussed this in the considerations part. You are using a wrong Likert scale. Now I'm going to discuss this further in the example section as well. Okay, another important point. I just went on to Google and searched job satisfaction and found a scale. Now, this scale might be from someone who has written a blog. This scale might be from someone who may not be a professional researcher. Do not search Google or search engines for questionnaire. I'm not talking about Scholar or Google. I'm talking about Google or maybe some blog pages or maybe some tutorial pages or things like that. Go for questionnaires that are published, even if you can search from Google, but Obviously, if somebody has given their opinion about how something should be measured, do not just copy and paste it and use it, because they are not well researched scales. Do not copy from thesis. Even if you are copying from thesis, go to the original source. Find out from which or from where this particular scale was adapted or adopted. So go to the original source. Do not just copy the questionnaire from a particular thesis. Adapting from non-peer reviewed databases. Again, same problem that I've discussed here in both these points. Obviously, go for peer reviewed databases. Something that is peer reviewed, like Sage, Springer, JSTOR, quality journals, quality papers. Okay, most of the times what we do is we look into a paper, we find a particular scale, we just copy it, we do not go to the original sources. What happens is when the paper goes into review, your reviewer comes back with a notice or with a comment that you did not use the scale as it was in the original source. And this has happened to us, and that's why we have learned all these mistakes that I have identified. 90% of these actually happened to me when I was learning research. So learn from my mistakes. Actually, these are my mistakes. Okay, you need a scale for each construct. Now, recently I was talking to someone. He or she might be in this particular webinar as well, and this is a misconception in the mind of new researchers, early career researchers. Make sure you've got a scale, a measure, a questionnaire for each of the construct in the study. You can't just say that, okay, I'm measuring independent, so this will give me results about dependent. You can't just say that I'm measuring moderating, so this will give me about independent or dependent. You have to have questions about each and every construct in your study. And there is a second part to it as well. We'll be discussing it further. Now, here are a few examples about a very bad questionnaire, slightly problematic, and a slightly good one. Let's go for a bad one first. Okay. Okay, here it is. Let's say, how does it start? Okay, that's fine. You start with the survey questionnaire. It is a time bound questionnaire for time one. Okay, dear sir, madam, this is what I'm doing. This is how I'm going to select the questionnaire. But the problem lies is, or why I'm saying it's a bad questionnaire. Look at this question. Let me highlight, let me just like focus it on it. Read this questionnaire. Is your wife, husband's attitude towards your work is good? There is grammatical mistakes or there are grammatical issues. And the second is, this is an interrogative question, is. But look at the scale that has been used. Strongly disagree, disagree, somewhat disagree. Now, if you ask someone, does your wife or husband help you at work? The natural answer would be yes or no. You can't agree or disagree with an interrogative question. Now, data was already collected on this questionnaire when it came to me. So this is a wrong questionnaire. This is very problematic. Okay, sorry, let's go back. Again, are you feeling less motivated than usual and the scale is never, almost never, sometimes, almost every time, every time? I would have like drafted it as like I enable it. If I was to do it, I would have done it like this. I am feeling less motivated than usual. Now this statement makes sense with the Likert scale that I want to use. I feel less motivated than usual. Well, never, almost never, sometime, or sometimes rather, almost every time or every time. So these are the problems that you should avoid, because this creates a bad impression in the mind of the reader, because you did not do your homework, you did not focus on the development of the questionnaire. Okay, this is a bad example. A slightly problematic one would be this one. Okay, let's go for this one. Now, if you look at the other scales, what they have done is they have used 1 to 5 Likert scale, from strongly disagree to strongly agree. But in some of the questions, what they have done is they have gone for yes or no. What if you want to correlate these different constructs? Now, the options or Likert scale for one particular scale is significantly different to other Likert scale, or this is not a Likert scale at all. This is dichotomous scale. So you cannot correlate the latent variables there. You've got analytical problems. So do not do such stuff. Look at this now. Again, yes or no. These are yes or no options. I find it easy to identify a success. Why not use a proper Likert scale with it? Because they developed it themselves and they did not know how to develop a questionnaire. They went into this whole thing without reading about scale development process, and that's why it turned out to be like this. All of this looks fine. This is particularly fine, no problems whatsoever. But the problem lies here. The problem lies here. So this is something that you should avoid. Use proper scale or use proper response scale for your statements. A slightly good one would be this. Now, if you look at these questionnaires, actually this is not something. Well, if you look at this questionnaire, it takes too much of space. Now, you need to save your space. So what I have done is, me and Umar, we have designed this slightly comprehensive, concise scale format or questionnaire format. What we do is, we at the top ask for demographic information. Then we've got a space here. Then we go for and identify the scale that we are using. And in here we number or provide the numbers for this scale. And we have shortened the borders as well. The text is 11 point Calibri. And each of the latent construct is followed by the items. And if you count, you can have at least over 65 items in these two pages. So you get front and back. So if you formatted it like this, obviously you can get more questions in. So this actually saves you space and creates a perception in the mind of the respondent that, well, it's particularly short questionnaire and I can do it easily. So these were the examples about a bad questionnaire with problems in the wording and the response scale, then a slightly bad one with only the response scale, and this is slightly good one, a complete, a concise, comprehensive questionnaire. Moving on, and I think all of you would have been waiting for this one. How do you develop a questionnaire when you can't find one? Okay, before going on, let's finish this and then I'll take the questions. So what do you do when you develop a questionnaire, or what do you do when you can't find a questionnaire? So you develop your own, or you will have to develop your own because you can't find one. So the first step, identify the conceptualization, identify the definition, operationalize the construct. What is meant by that particular variable? How do you define that particular variable? And not just one definition, try to find as many definitions as possible so you know what is meant by that particular construct. Okay, we'll be taking the questions in the end, Aisha. All questions in the end, please. Malik Saab, all questions in the end. Thank you. Yes, all questions in the end, please. No raise of hands, all questions in the end. Or you can put the questions in the chat box and I'll answer them in the end, please. Thank you. Now, so the first thing, identify the conceptualization, identify the definitions that are available. What if there are no definitions available? What if you can't find a definition? What if there are, like you searched Google Books, you searched Google Scholar, you searched and you can't find anything? Now, what you will find about identify or note down what you can find about that particular construct. If there are no definition, there might be certain attributes associated with that particular construct. If there is no definition, there might be certain characteristics associated with that particular construct. There might be a few people who might have written something about that particular construct. That's the reason you have read about it, isn't it? So note down those characteristics, note down those attributes. Identifiers, you can call them identifiers for your construct. Once you've got this information, obviously, so you identify the characteristics if you can't find the definition. What are the characteristics of the concept? Why is this concept like referred to as this concept? If you can't find any definition with regards to, say, community hostility, so what do you mean by community? What do you mean by hostility? Create your own definition, create your own conceptualization. Because obviously there is a definition of community in the literature, there is a definition of hostility in the definition. Or when you are reading about that particular concept in books or papers, there might be certain attributes associated with that concept. Identify them. And then once you have got those conceptualizations, once you have got those definitions and those things, once you have got those descriptions, the next step is identify the key terms that are in those particular conceptualizations or those descriptions. What key terms can you find out? What are the key terminologies that keep repeating in that conceptualization? The next step is talk to an expert and see if your identification and conceptualization is in line with the concept. This is again particularly important. Talk to an expert. Maybe someone who has experience in scale development. Maybe someone who has experience in this particular area. Talk to them. Identify what they say. See what they are saying, so that you know that you are in the right direction. The next step is, once you have identified the key terms, once you know that your direction is right, draft statements on each of the term or characteristics that you have identified. Put them in writing. Create a statement to define that particular, or rather to measure that particular construct. Remove any repetition. Once you have drafted all these statements, go through your conceptualization, or rather draft of statements. Once you draft that particular statement or statements, go through those statements, read them again and see if there is certain kind of repetition in them. Remove that particular repetition. Avoid multiple questions in a single statement. This is very common when you are developing your scale. What we normally do is we've got multiple questions in the same question. For example, I'm satisfied with pay and commission. Well, pay is something different and commission is something different. I get a pay of maybe say 10,000 rupees. So I'm not satisfied with my pay, but I'm very satisfied with my commission because I get maybe 5% commission on making one single sale. And this is very huge in marketing circles. Some of your marketing expert would know, or experts would know. So do not ask multiple questions in a single statement. Your question should be complete in itself. It should be atomic rather. So ask atomic questions. Check its language again, very important. Get it reviewed by an expert in the field. Send it to an expert. You can ask foreign experts for help as well. Someone who has published in this area, or someone who you think might have experience in this particular area. You should obviously ask scale development experts as well. Use it for your study. Now once you have done it, all the things satisfied, all things done, use it, check its reliability. Once you collect the data, check its validity. If you are using it for a research paper or developed it for a research paper, you can go for a pilot study, or you may not go for a pilot study. But there are a few important things to note here. Note, do not establish links within the question. This is again some sort of a common mistake. For instance, you are developing a questionnaire to study the impact of, say, job satisfaction on organizational performance. So your statement, there should be no statement like my satisfaction with my pay and commission has improved organizational performance. This is wrong. Only you should only ask question about one scale. Do not create dependencies in your statements, because this is what you do. This is done through the analysis. This is what the analysis is for. So do not create these dependencies in your statements. Again, it is very important that the aforementioned steps are only for a short scale that you want to develop for a paper, maybe or for a short study, or maybe for a thesis. If you want to do full-fledged scale development study, there are other steps that should be incorporated as well. We are planning our next webinar on scale development, purely and thoroughly on scale development. Now, example of scale development. Let's do an example. Let's develop a scale. So we are going to develop internal marketing scale. So in order to develop this scale, my first step, again, let's go stepwise. So my first step was identifying the definitions for internal marketing. So I went into the research papers, searched the research papers, and I found out that, okay, for instance, there are many other definitions as well. But what I found out initially was these. Let's cut it for now. So I found out these definitions. So I wrote the definitions with their sources: definition, source, definition, source, definition, source. And then I started reading about, or reading these definitions. I started reading these definitions. And while I was reading these definitions, I came across certain keywords. Okay, the philosophy, so internal marketing, according to Ahmed and Rafiq, is a philosophy that focuses on customer satisfaction. So this is one keyword. Let's bold it and italicize. Organizational productivity through continuous attention and improvement of the jobs. So it is about improvement of the jobs and the environment in which they execute them. So the outcome, these two things are the outcomes: customer satisfaction and organizational productivity. How do you achieve these outcomes? Through improvement in jobs and through better environment. So let me draft statements on this. My organization continuously makes efforts to improve my working conditions. Now, in this single statement, I've covered both these things: environment and improvement of the jobs. Obviously, you will say, well, this looks very easy, but obviously, this is not that easy. Once you are finding definition, obviously, you are reading papers as well. So you get to know the concept as well. That's why reading is important. You will know the concept, you will know how to write, you will know how to draft statements. This will not come in one single day, I'm telling you this, but this will come to you if you keep on reading. So what I did was, I did this for a paper of mine actually. So let's go back and let's see. Okay, these are the keywords that I identified from these statements. motivation to serve, workplace environment, change management. Now, if we read this definition, these are the keywords that emerge. IM is referred to managers can alter their culture of their organization by hiring, training, and motivating. Now, this is hiring, training, and motivating is actually part of human resource and development that are consistent with new vision. Vision is about organizational change and by itself is a characteristics of IM as well. So culture is about change because you are altering the culture. So that is about organizational change. So how do I draft a statement from this particular term? My organization is continuously improving and making significant organizational changes. Now you would say, well, why I have used multiple questions? Because both of the terminologies are actually the same, improvement or organizational change. But again, as said, let's change it. So my organization is continuously making significant organizational changes. So you can obviously draft questions on this term or this term. The organization communicates its vision to its employees. Now, this is another statement drafted from that particular terminology. Now, again, this won't be easy. In order to make it easier, read, read, and read. Read some questionnaires in your area. Something that obviously you can find easily, like for example, servant leaderships. You can find questionnaires on servant leadership. Read those statements so you get to know how a statement looks. So once you know this is how statements look, and read those definitions that they have provided in their particular paper and see how they have drafted that particular statement from that particular definition, and then you will get to know, okay, this is how statements should be drafted. These are the things that should be involved, these are the things that should not be involved. I hope this makes sense, but obviously again, this will take time, this will take effort. Moving on, and that's about it. Thank you so very much for listening to me. I hope this session would have helped you understand the common mistakes that we do, the things that we should consider while drafting our questionnaire, and what should we do when we do not have a questionnaire. Thank you very much. Now we'll go to our question and answer session.